I'm back.
Hi.
COVID ain't stopping nobody. No, I'm just kidding. It's stopping a lot of people actually. And I have to say, it's kind of stopping me too in my clinical work. Like hospitals are closed, nursing homes are closed. So I'm pretty much working remotely for the most part. My kids are at home like everybody else is. So challenging times out there. But it feels good to be starting today again with these lives and starting another series of interviews. It's really neat. Over the next several weeks, I'm going to be interviewing some documentary filmmakers who have received funding from the TELUS Fund and the Stories for Caregivers platform to create a minimum, I think it's about 5 minutes on average for the stories documentary about some type of caregiving. I've been a part of the TELUS program for a while. I've done a few web series and do some other things for them. Our film got funded as well, and we'll talk about that at another time. But today I have on one of the filmmakers, and she's also the subject, I guess the main subject of the documentary as well. Her name is Joëlle Pouliot. Did I say it right, Joëlle?
Pouliot.
Pouliot,
What?
something like that. I don't know.
Doesn't
Anyways,
matter.
Joëlle. Let's just call her Joëlle.
Totally.
And I'm happy to have her on. And a lot of times when we talk about caregiving, we focus a lot on seniors, and I try really hard on this program to expand that it's not just about seniors, it's about all kinds of caregiving. And this we're going to be talking about mental illness today and the impact of on the caregivers and on individuals. This subject is very near and dear to my heart. I myself have general anxiety disorder. My son has an anxiety disorder. Depression runs in my family. I'm very familiar with the impact of mental illness and what it can do to an individual, what it can do to a family. There are some real highlights and good things about it. Actually, I can tell you, even having anxiety, there's lots of things that work in my favor by having it. Like, for example, I already knew to prepare for something like COVID and already had masks and gloves and all that in my house. So there was a benefit, a silver lining to being anxious. But today we're going to focus actually on a different diagnosis, which I don't think I've talked about on the show, and it's bipolar disorder. And I'm glad we're talking about it because that term bipolar is thrown around very casually these days. Like, oh, the weather is so bipolar. You know, if one day it's really sunny and the next day it's really cold. And it's really not doing service to those who have that diagnosis and who are dealing with a very difficult and challenging illness to manage. And so I want to really talk about it in a clinical way, talk about what it really means, try and destigmatize it. So we're going to be talking to Joëlle. She has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, but she also is a filmmaker, and she's going to be doing a story about that. Joëlle, we'll get to your film in a minute. Let me first introduce you properly. Joëlle is a journalist and a filmmaker, as I've mentioned, and a mental health advocate. And she's currently working with Mouvement Santé Mentale Québec. Her work has appeared in CBC, the New York Times, Vice, and her upcoming documentary is called Better. Thanks for being here, Joëlle.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad that we get to talk about such a unusual topic, I think, in caregiving.
Yeah, it's not
Not
unusual for those who are
unusual.
experiencing it, but it's not
It's
something that's
usual. It's not a common conversation, but it's a very typical situation. Yeah.
yeah, I think so, and I think part of the reasons why we don't talk about it as much is there's such a stigma still with mental illness. So if you say, for example, my parents are struggling, their mobilities, they're having a hard time to manage, there's less of a stigma attached to that, and we're more readily open to talking to people about it. But it's really hard to come out like I did and say, yeah, I have anxiety, or for you to say, yeah, I have a diagnosis of bipolar. And so that's part of the reason why we're not talking about it, I think.
I mean, there's still so much shame with mental health, for whether it be for the people going through it, or actually their caregivers. I think it is hard for people to admit, my husband, my friend, my daughter has depression, has anxiety, has bipolar, has schizophrenia. I think even when you go in levels like bipolar and schizophrenia, they're very scary illnesses for people, and people don't understand them, and so it's kind of this, like, people stop asking questions often, or they stop talking because they don't know what to say. And that's why I think we're working on a film like Better, because we want families and friends to feel like they have the tools to talk about it, to go get help for it, because it takes a huge toll on other people to take care of someone who's ill, for sure.
I love what you just said, Joelle, about those diagnoses, in particular bipolar schizophrenia, and we could name more that are scary for people. It's true. And I think one of the positive silver linings of COVID is, I think there's so much more now discussion about depression and anxiety, which so many of us have lived with
Yeah.
anyways, but now a larger number of people are struggling because of the impact of COVID on their life in so many areas. We don't need to get into that, but clearly more people are coming out and saying, yeah, I'm struggling. But it is true that when people say schizophrenia, I mean, they'll say, oh, he's nuts. And that term
Yeah.
psychotic, people go, oh, she's psychotic. And
Yeah.
again, it's thrown out very casually. No, psychosis is an actual symptom, and we can define what it means. And so I do want to get into those definitions to really explain to people what it means to have a diagnosis with bipolar. But first, I
Yeah.
want to just go back. I want to learn more about your story. I know the onset of your symptoms was later in your life. So lots of people who have mental illness, like myself, I've had anxiety since probably the day I was born. I mean, my first time I remember is I was about 2.5, and I started
Wow.
pulling the hair out on one side of my head. So I've
Oh.
had it for my whole life. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's called trichotillomania. Again, really
Yeah.
weird diagnosis. Yeah. Anyway, but let's talk about the onset. How old were you, and what started to happen in terms of symptoms that led you to kind of realize, I think I need some help?
So I used to think I was a stressed out person. When I think about it now, my past, I probably had anxiety too, but I just didn't know what it was. I was just a very like go-getter person, and performance at work and at school was always, such an important thing. And so there's always like high pressure to be the best at everything I did, and put a lot of pressure on my self-esteem. And so I'm just putting that into context because when I was 27, I went through a lot of stressful, big traumas at the same time. And I just went into a total funk. Like I got, excuse me, I'm having a hard time with my throat today. I I would say now it was like a big burnout, which is a cute term for depression. Um, Really, I went through my first depressive episode then, and it lasted about 6 months. It was quite long.
And when you
And
say depressive episodes, Joelle, explain what I know what that means as a
yeah,
clinician, but explain what that means that in terms of the symptoms. What is it? It's more than just like I'm kind of in a funk, having a bad day. Having a major depressive episode is something much more serious. So describe to me what it meant.
absolutely. Yeah, even I thought I knew what depression was, and I had no clue until I experienced it because what started happening was, for example, I I had a lot of anxiety mixed with the depression. So I wouldn't trust my own judgment for anything. Any decision was like this total fear of making the wrong decision, to a point where even like doing my groceries was difficult because I was too stressed out about all the aspects of the things you choose at the grocery store, and then the people you're going to see, and you have to keep appearances. And so that was like the little things that started, I mean, starting to be like, what do I wear, and can't choose clothing. But it's not, a girly thing. I'm having a hard time choosing my outfit. It's I can't get dressed. And then it was I can't get out of bed, not because I'm lazy and I don't feel like starting, is I just my body won't let me get up. There's this constant exhaustion. You're not sleeping though, so you're exhausted, but you can't sleep. And so I think when you go into this cycle, it just, you start having racing thoughts of everything that's going bad in your life. You just amplify it times 100. You start thinking that people don't love you anymore, even though they do. I felt very dissociated from things. So I felt like life was kind of just a movie playing in front of me, and I was just trying to survive it. I felt no connection to people. The people I loved, I knew they meant something to me, but I didn't feel like I was there when I was with them. And I mean, I love life, and suddenly life was hell, like every day. So that was the first thing. And because I was such a high performer, not having my mental capacities to even read a book. I wasn't able to read a book. I wasn't able to focus on a TV show, um, because I was so slowed down. Uh, it just made everything very, very difficult. So when those
Well,
symptoms
that's
started
really
happening.
yeah, I wanna talk about what happened when the symptoms started and what you did, but let
Yeah,
me just say something quickly, Joelle, because I think you're making oh, first of all, thank you so much for sharing how
yeah,
hard it
of
was for
course.
you because it's not easy to talk about, and it sounds like it was incredibly debilitating, and I
Yeah,
think for a lot of people, these feelings are debilitating, and then we start beating ourselves up because as high performers, which I am as well, you start
yeah,
saying, what's wrong with me? Why can't I be good enough? And how come I
yeah,
can't kick this? Why can't I just get out of bed? I should be able
yeah,
to overcome this. So why
yeah.
am I so weak? And then we have like an additional layer of all of this self hate,
Yeah, there's the
hatred, and
second
this
layer of shame and this
yes.
feeling. I even felt like I was failing in my depression. I was like failing at not getting better, failing myself, failing other people. I mean, I was only 27, but to me, 27 was when you should be building your career, and it was a huge shock. Yeah, so sorry, you had another question, I think.
No, I wanna talk about what happened, but let me just mention Corinne, someone commented, and I can never read Facebook comments while we're live, I don't know why, but
Oh, okay.
LinkedIn I see. Anyways, Corinne on LinkedIn talked about in terms of scary diagnoses, borderline personality falls into that too, and Corinne, you're so
Mm,
right, and actually, that's something that I should talk about on the show too. I'd like to get into that one day because that is a scary diagnosis for people
yeah,
to have, to hear, and also
totally.
to know that a family member, has been diagnosed with that. So, you talked about these debilitating symptoms. You're stuck in bed, you can't get out. Were you living alone at that time, or were you with somebody who said, "Hey, Joelle, we've got a problem here. Let's get you some help"? Or did you have to somehow mobilize yourself to get some help?
So I had a boyfriend at the time, but he just had no idea what to do. Like he, would be like, "Get out of bed," and he could see that something was wrong, but he really didn't understand it. He tried his best, to be honest, but there was a lot of like, "Okay, let's go. Come on, get up," and then you know realizing slowly, okay, something's off. So I was in touch with my parents a lot at the time, and it was my mother who actually showed me it was a questionnaire to see if you had depression. And so, there's also sorts of things on Google, but I was answering the questions and going, oh, yes, I'm doing this. I have this. I think about this. And I think it was 10 out of 10. And then I went to see just a family doctor. And within 10 minutes, I had antidepressants, which was pretty quick.
Yeah.
Um,
Quick and
but,
also a bit scary too, right?
and
That they're
also,
so
it was,
quick to give out medication. I'm not putting that doctor down, and obviously you were in a dangerous situation for yourself and such. There's goods and bads with the quick response of medication, huh? I don't know.
I wish we'd had a bit more of a context, a bit of an explanation as a family, like, hey, this is normal, this is gonna happen. When you take this medication, you're gonna feel like this. And the thing with antidepressants is it makes you feel worse for about 2 weeks until you start feeling better if it works out. But usually you have to try, 5 different kinds before you find what works for you. Um, and so, yeah, I think it would have been great to have more support from my family too. Like, here's what Joelle will need. That's part of why I'm making this documentary series is to help caregivers. You know, they have no idea how to help, and it's normal. I mean, no one learns how to do that until you're stuck in that situation.
Yeah, and you can
So
feel like a failure as a family member if you're like, why can't I help my girlfriend? Why can't I
yeah,
help my daughter? What am I doing wrong? What else can I possibly do? And it's frightening to me that so many of our healthcare providers give a diagnosis, give a medication, and then just send you off. And this is so
yeah,
common with caregivers. I mean, I have people call me all the time and say, "Yeah, the doctor just told me my mom has dementia." Like, were you referred anywhere? Did you get no, I don't know
yeah,
what to do. What do I expect? And I think we have to be very conscientious as healthcare providers that people might be hearing that diagnosis and getting medication for the first time ever. And they
Yeah.
need to have information. They need to have phone numbers to call back that provider or other people to get that kind of support. And I think your documentary is going to certainly, help people with that. So also with this diagnosis, bipolar disorder, there's two different halves to it. There's a
Yeah.
manic half or hypomanic, which means like a watered down version of the mania. And then we have the depressive episode, which you're talking about. You have to have a depressive episode for, I think it's at least 2 weeks in order to have that diagnosis. You were telling me 6 months. So clearly that worked. And the
Yeah.
mania has to be for about a week period of time, for most days and for most of the day. So, like out of those 7 days, on most days, and for most of the day. And
Yeah.
some of the manic symptoms that people are maybe familiar with are things that can cause risk and consequences to people: overspending, using of drugs, unprotected sex. But then there's also this high level of energy, pressured speech, overachieving. What were some of the mania symptoms that you had? And was it hypomanic or manic?
My first episode was definitely manic. It was pretty impressive how it happened when you think about it. I mean, I was this sort of vegetable person, completely exhausted from depression, and then suddenly the antidepressants started working, but a bit too quickly. And so someone with bipolar disorder, we didn't know at the time, but someone who has bipolar disorder can't take antidepressants without a mood stabilizer.
Yeah.
Because if you just take an antidepressant, you can go high, have a manic episode. So we didn't know at the time. And so what happened was within like 2 weeks, I started, I just remember feeling so confident. I went from feeling so crappy to suddenly I feel so good about myself. I felt like I had the best ideas in the world. I felt like I could achieve anything, which are all nice feelings, until they go too high, which is I have no limits, I have no boundaries. I can do whatever I want when I want. I don't need to sleep because I can do everything. Somehow still have the energy to do everything with very little sleep and be very brutally honest with people. So, let's say you don't like someone very much, you don't say it because you're a diplomatic person. Well, you'll just say it when you have a manic episode. So it's actually a big problem because, in a work environment, with friends and family, as soon as someone will say, "Hey, you're being a little intense," it's typically someone in a manic episode doesn't see that it's happening. And so they'll be like, "What are you talking about?" For me, it was, "Hey, I'm finally feeling good about myself, like back off." And so you push away the people who are trying to help you usually.
Mm.
Um, and it's very embarrassing after when you're better, to see what you did because, yeah, where you're talking about spending money, we're not talking about, one little shopping spree. We're
No.
talking thousands and thousands and thousands. For me, it was thousands over 3 months. Um, and just people not understanding why suddenly I thought I was a superstar and I could do anything. And, you know, it was very excessive and unpleasant for other people who are trying to help. And you're really unstoppable when you're manic because you don't want help until you crash again. And you really only go and ask for help when you get depression again, which is the inevitable come down.
Yeah. Yeah, and that shame cycle that you started to touch on again of when you reflect back at what your behavior was, and then you're just so
Yeah.
ashamed of yourself that you got to that. So then when you're in that depressive state, I'm sure those are some of the thoughts that are going again and again through your mind too, is, oh, now
Yeah.
I've pushed everybody away. Now I'm in debt and people are having to get me out of debt. And so that same shame cycle continues. I just want to say, Brenda made a comment. I want to
Yeah.
read it. She said, "It's very good of you, Joelle, that you shared what was going on with with those around you. That is so key. Some try to hide it and shut their support systems out, which makes it more difficult for their support systems to not help but understand, excuse me, I'm not reading it correctly. It makes it even more difficult for their support systems to not only help but understand. And
Yeah.
then those support systems break down. That's 100%, Brenda,
I mean, at
100%.
first, my support system, and I'm so part of this film is I'm interviewing my family and friends about how they experienced my episodes. It's that's what the movie's about. And um I knew sort of, how they experienced it because we've talked about it, but hearing it during these interviews, it's pretty shocking. They thought, well, at first they never thought mental illness. It was just, especially not bipolar. It was like, because we didn't really know anyone in the family. Now looking back, there might have been, but it wasn't really clear that it was that for about 2 years. And so it was just like, who is this person? And they wouldn't recognize their daughter anymore. And this feeling of losing their daughter and this personality that I was becoming. I'm much more cooperative when I have a depressive episode because I need people. Um, and when I have a manic episode or a hypomanic, which is a bit lower, yeah, there's just this sense of like, back off. I'm super powerful and let me do what I want. And they know the chaos that's coming up. They know the shame that I'm going to live. They know the money I'm going to spend. Um,
Yeah,
so
but
it's
you're
hard. It's
pushing them
hard.
away, so there's no way for them to stop you. And what was it like,
Yeah.
Joelle, when you're doing these interviews? Um, it must have been very hard. I'm just thinking even of your family and friends to like be very honest and transparent with you and say, look, this was a nightmare for us too. You're not the only one who was impacted. I mean, that's gotta like, it's like a knife in the heart for you. How did you, first of all, prepare yourself in advance for the interviews and then cope and manage with those messages that were given to you about, the impact that you had on other people's lives?
So we created this system. I had several conversations with my family before, and I said, I want you to say everything. I want you. The aim is not to hurt me or not hurt me. The aim is I want to help caregivers in mental health. And so if we're just kind of glossing over saying it was rough, we're not really helping anybody. The aim is for someone to go, oh my God, that's exactly how I feel as a mom or as a friend. So frustrated, so sad, so I feel guilty. So there was that sort of conversation that happened. And then I'm working with a journalist friend named Jory McKay. And so he interviews my family. I write the questions with them, but he interviews them. I'm not in the room so that they feel that they can say really how they felt. And I was really impressed by them because they were just very honest. It's beautiful, it's touching to see how much, they loved me and tried to help me. I'm very lucky my support system is around me. I mean, I think I would be homeless by now if I didn't have my family. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, I'm serious. There's a lot of people in homeless situations that are just because they didn't have the caregiving support that
A high
others
percentage of
do.
the homeless population is mentally ill
Yes.
with all sorts of diagnoses, and they've destroyed their families with their behaviors. And then, it's
Yeah.
cyclical because of the different symptomatology. You
Yeah.
help, and then you go back, and then families eventually have to set their own boundaries, perhaps, and say, I can't do this anymore, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
And so yeah, we had those questions with my colleague, and then I came into the room and we had a smaller conversation face to face. And I think it was it was heartbreaking for me to hear a lot of it for sure. I knew a lot of it already, but it's always sad to hear how your own illness impacts other people. You didn't have control over it, so deep down it's not your fault, but you still feel extremely guilty. And that's something I'm still living with, and it's something I'm working on. And I think this film has been a bit traumatizing for me. It's brought a lot of stuff back, but it's also been healing. And I think it's been nice for our family to have those conversations because we don't necessarily force those conversations if we don't have to, but we've come up with a crisis plan as a family. with my doctor. I have a great psychiatrist team. And my doctors really want to make sure that my family and friends are involved, because you can have the best medication in the world, but if you don't have a great support system outside of the hospital, outside of a clinic, whatever, you just go back to your mental
Mhm.
illness. Um, so yeah,
So I love hearing that the psychiatric team is working with your friends and family and that you've
yeah,
come up with this crisis plan so that you're proactively preparing and have the support and steps in place. I think when people fall in crisis, that's when our decision making is at its worst. So it's
yeah,
probably really helpful for everybody to have that plan in place. The medication, as you said, can be effective, but it can only go so far. Have you been able? I mean, you're working and obviously you're managing, which is something else that I wanted to bring out on this.
yeah.
Is just because we have a diagnosis doesn't mean we can't work and thrive in life. As I said, I have anxiety and I'm doing very well in my life. There are times that are harder, but I'm doing fine. And so how are you, Joelle, managing your illness, in a long-term way so that you're still, very successful as a journalist and doing some other things?
Took a long time to get to where I am. I mean, I will have been healthy for about a year now, which for me is a lot of time. And so within, the past 6 years, it was a total roller coaster. So I'd start working again, and then I'd have to take time off and start working again. And at first, I was freelancing, so that was a possibility, but financially, it was really stressful, really hard. So that's something that caregivers, it's a decision to make. Do you help someone? And I would
Mhm.
say please do, but um, it is it is not easy to help someone who constantly might burn all your money and then needs it when they have depression. Um, and so, there's systems in place to help people with that so that they make sure, like, let's say I don't have access to as much credit as I used to. There's ways to protect yourself financially, but in terms of working, I have a very understanding work environment. I've had to have many conversations with them saying, I'm doing so much better. I can work, but there are times where I have to work part time because I'm just exhausted. I need more sleep than I used to. Um, my brain just isn't working the same. Like I don't process information the same way, in the sense that I think I have more of an attention deficit than I used to, just from getting all these depressive episodes. I've had about 6 depressive episodes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and have heavy depressive episodes. So it's relearning how to work with a new brain, I would say. It's a challenge, and I'm still learning every day where to put boundaries, uh, because I have this want to work and be the best and that. I always have to go, okay, no, like, you don't want to be sick again. So I think COVID is helping everyone realize that, like, we don't have to be the best at everything. We don't have to be machines. We can enjoy what we do and be good at what we do without exhausting ourselves.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And
and
setting
mine,
boundaries is so important, Joelle.
yeah,
In all areas of our life, whether or not we have a mental illness, boundaries are really important and really healthy. And setting a boundary doesn't make you a jerk, actually, because sometimes when people say they want to say no to somebody, but they feel bad about it, well,
yeah,
setting a boundary doesn't mean you're a jerk. Setting a boundary means you're taking care of yourself. And I do the same thing with my workload. Like, I'm very
yeah,
particular about the files that I take clinically and how many I manage at a particular time because I know myself. And so I know how to manage my caseload so that I don't have, intense anxiety periods where I can't leave the house
yeah,
type of a thing. So
right,
I really appreciate and respect what it is you're saying because I think it could help a lot of people who are struggling with a diagnosis or not that setting boundaries, knowing what you can do and can't do. Hopefully you have some financial flexibility and to be able to
mhm.
do that as well. I realize that's not the case for
There is
everybody.
there is government help, for mental
Hmm.
health. There are programs that help for people with mental issues to go back to work, and they basically pay employers to be more flexible.
Ah,
And I would encourage people to look into that because involving your boss in your mental health is actually it's okay and it's actually important because if you just disappear all the time because you're sick, I mean, they need to know, and instead of firing you, they can keep you and adapt, you know? It doesn't mean you're not a good worker, and I think there's a lot of guilt with people who have mental health issues at work. They feel like they're not as good as other people, so they work harder to kind of compensate, but that's really not the way to be a balanced sort of person. Um,
yeah, great advice to be honest with your employer. I'm sure it's really hard for
it's
people.
hard, it is hard.
But I think that's really, really good advice. And I do think, as I was saying, that one of the benefits of COVID has been more of an awareness of mental health.
Yeah.
And so I think people are more open and adaptable and flexible, and we can have these conversations a lot better now than we could, let's say 3 years ago. Let's get to your film, Joelle, because I want to make sure we have some time to discuss it. So it's called Better, and it's going to be on the Stories for Caregivers platform, which is being funded by the TELUS Fund.
Mhm.
I know it's you, and you have a team that you're working with. So right now, you were funded for just the pilot. So what are you going to be talking about in the pilot episode?
So we've divided the series in 8 episodes, and the first episode, which is the pilot, is really the sort of the period of chaos that comes with understanding, oh my God, I have a mental illness, and the family going, oh my God, our lives are changed forever. And so this sort of period of at first you're just kind of hoping it's an episode that you might just had a burnout and it'll get better, but there's a period where you start understanding, okay, no, my life has changed forever, and so is my surroundings. And to me, a caregiver involves friends as well. I mean, they are very important in feeling good about yourself, and you can't just have your parents in your life as much as you can love them. And I've had a really, really great support system. I've lost friends in the process, but I've had friends who have gone for walks with me when I didn't wanna go out, they've made dinner for me, they've watched movies with me, they've just been there. I think my favorite friend brought me dancing when I didn't wanna do anything at all, but just being out and acting normally made me feel loved, made me feel, like a human again, when I was in a bad time. Um, so yeah, the first episode is really the understanding that our lives are changed forever and we have become caregivers. Um,
Yeah.
because when we think of caregiver, we think usually the elderly
Mhm.
and uh, cancer, end of life, um,
Or
and
sometimes young
usually
children
there's
with disabilities or something.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
usually and mental illness is so invisible, and there's no clear path of recovery. So it's not like take this medication, you'll feel better forever. It's dependent on your life stressors. It can change. So yeah, it's a big realization to think we're all in this together if we want to be, but potentially forever. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love, that in this series, and I hope that after the pilot, you get funded for the full thing. By the way, everybody, when you do watch the pilot, they'll be posted on the Stories for Caregivers platform, and you vote on the pilots, and then they're gonna fund the full series for, I don't know, 1 or 2. So vote for me, Joelle.
I'll vote for you and you vote for
Yeah,
me.
good, good. But I'm interviewing some other people too, so I hope we all get funded.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be great. But one of the things that I love is that you're showing your side of it, but then you're going to show how much it impacts families. And what I'm hearing you talk about with all the shame and all of the guilt and the potential destruction and burning bridges, but then also needing people, like at the end of the day, it's about you needing to feel loved and for
Mhm.
people needing to find ways to show you that they love you, which may not heal you, quote unquote, but which will give you what you need in that moment. And so it sounds to me like your
I
film is going
mean
to really do that.
love is the best medication. I think, it goes a long way, and Um, yeah, I hope that this film, I wish that my family had seen a film like this, you know? I wish that they went to get their own help. They eventually, my friend, sorry, my family, they went to therapists to know how to deal with this, but there is not enough resources for caregivers. It can be a full-time job. It can be a part-time job, it can be a full-time job, but there is no training for it.
Yeah,
And it's a decision you make. Do you want to be that person? Do you want to be a caregiver? You sometimes you don't have a choice, but it does come down to what kind of caregiver do I want to be? And that makes an entire change in the person's life that needs the help.
absolutely. And this, you're producing this film with your team, Cozy Productions, and I'll put the
Yeah,
link to your website
thank
because there's
you.
no link to watch the film yet, but I'll put the link to your website in this thread. Before we finish, Joelle, do you mind if I go back to your personal experience? I wanted to ask you one
Mm,
more question. If you're not comfortable answering it, it's fine. But
sure.
as you're thinking about your future, you're still a young woman and you're
Yeah.
perhaps thinking about marriage, family, kids. I don't know. Do you put this in your thought process? I know I did with my anxiety. Like, do I really want to have kids? And what does this mean for them? And what impact will it have? The
Yeah.
genetic component. And am I going to, bring this on to my kids? I personally went through that.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing what you're thinking about as a young woman for the future?
I think it's really relevant. I mean, I think a lot about it a lot, you know, and I think when I've been dating as well, like it's always been a challenge of when do I tell this person, and what do they need to know and what do they need to understand, and I don't need them to be my babysitter because I can take care of myself, but there are moments where I might need time help from a partner, you know? And so it's certainly brought my bar up for who I want in my life. And as for family and children, it's a hard conversation. I've gone from okay, I'd never be able to actually there are solutions. I know a lot of people with bipolar disorder who have families.
Mhm.
It's just it's an extra challenge. It's really not the same as if you didn't have an illness. I am not there yet in my life, but I'm close to it, and I think like my doctors have always told me, you know, we'll be there if that's what you want to do.
Mm.
And I think that's great because I was reading about that yesterday, actually, that like 10 years ago, women with bipolar disorder were told not to have children.
Oh my god,
Um,
and probably,
yeah.
100 years ago, they were locked away in insane
Oh, yeah.
asylums.
They
Even
were
just with
gone.
PMS
Yeah.
symptoms sent a woman away,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
institutionalized,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh my god,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. But
yeah.
there are and, you know, there's surrogacy, there's adoption, there's, you know, there's all sorts of things that can happen. But yeah, I mean, I think the conversation I think mental health is starting to have more, science to and doctors helping and we're discovering new treatments to help people, but we're also allowing women with mental health issues to have much more of a powerful place in society. We used to be the locked up crazy ones, and
Exactly.
I think it's amazing that, you know, there might be a few presidents in the world that have these issues and we don't know, but I certainly am convinced that there's a lot of people in great positions with great families who have serious mental health issues.
1,000%,
Mm.
1,000%. They're just not discussing them. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
really appreciating my son plays football, and I'm really appreciating seeing the sports world start coming out and talking about these high
Yes.
performing players that are
Yeah.
talking about their own mental illness struggles and, depression, anxiety, whatever it might be. And I do believe that the more time goes on, the more we're going to start hearing from leaders in all kinds of areas, business, sports,
Yeah.
whatever area it is, and people are going to
It's
start coming
mostly
forward.
yeah, because it's mostly been reserved to artists. So it's
Yes,
been like, you
because it's
know,
like part of the creative process that I
yeah,
have some struggles or whatever. Yeah.
And that's great. It's true. I think people with mental health issues probably have more creative juices just because they're very in touch with their emotions. But that being said, I mean, there's all sorts of jobs that you can do. There's no limit except that you do have to respect the fact that you have more boundaries to put than you used to, I would say, or as other compared to other people perhaps. But it doesn't stop you from having a life that you want. It's a different
Absolutely.
life. It's a different life than what I thought I would have. Definitely not the same one, but still enjoy my life.
Good, good, and I'm really looking
Yeah.
forward to seeing, the full
Thank
episode.
you.
Thank you so much, Joelle, for being on, the show, and I'm going to put the link for your Cozy Productions, and her company does all sorts of other things too, so check out her website, and you can see what else they do. You guys do branding and marketing and
Yeah.
stuff too, right? Yeah, so you
Yeah.
can check them out, but thank you so much, Joelle, and, hang on. I'm gonna turn off the broadcast, but hang on so we can just chat for a sec.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, and,
Oh,
I'm
my
really
pleasure.
excited to see the span of caregiver videos out there. So, there's so many, unsung heroes, and I think that this is a great project for everybody to see.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Okay, thanks for listening in,
Thank
everybody.
you.
So hang on, Joelle.